Hey there, Delvers. Welcome back to the Vaults Remastered. And in tonight's episode, we're going to try to avoid the slog. We're going to be finding ways to engage large parties, encounters, combats using a little strategy I'm going to talk about known as dynamic hazards. Now, hey, what is the slog is the question, all right? Let's get into this. This starts with actually a Reddit post I found about 3 weeks ago. And I came across this one in the Pathfinder 2E subreddit by a poster by the name of Tostado Air. And they're talking about the challenge of balancing for a six-person party. So a little bit about Pathfinder encounter building. Mostly it's set up for four-player encounters. And they give suggestions on how to scale up if you have more than that, five, six, seven players, whatever. A similar challenge, I'm sure, happens in D&D, but they go on to say that they've been DMing for a six-person party. By the way, they're gonna mix up some D&D jargon terminology with some Pathfinder, so you have to bear with this a little bit. I'll try to translate. So they've been DMing, GMing for a six-person party, and they're struggling to balance it in a way that doesn't feel like a slog. And they say the two main ways they've looked at balancing is either you bump up the CR, which in Pathfinder terms is the level. In Pathfinder, your enemy has a level, and it's the same leveling as characters. So if you're a six level player, you should be fighting six level monsters, and you can plus or minus that, a couple levels in order to either increase or decrease the challenge, which we'll take a look at a little bit later. They're referring to it as CR here. So you're either bumping up the CR, the level, to compensate for the numbers, the extra couple players, or you bump up the number of enemies. And they go on to give a couple examples here for a party of six level 7 players. They might do a level 10 creature, level 9, two level 8s, or for a boss, they might have a level 11 and two level 7s. And the problem they're finding with this is that it means the monsters save nearly every check and are rarely crit. We'll take a look at that in a second, which feels bad for the players. So, in other words, they're having a hard time hitting, or the monsters are never failing a saving throw. And then it goes on to say that to fix that issue, they could go with larger numbers of lower level creatures like a level 9, a couple level 7s, four level 5s, four level 4s. And the issue they run into there is that the players do get the hits, they do get the criticals, they do get, the failed saving throws, that sort of stuff. But now it turns into large scale combat, and then that drags out or turns into a slog. And they should know that the encounters are being developed to be very challenging. There's a encounter difficulty system you use in Pathfinder. And so they're saying that usually with these types of encounters that they're setting up, that one or two of the players are going to go down through the combat. I presume that means not permanent death. They're able to get back up with some healing, that kind of thing. But then they go on to say that either scenario they do, either the higher level monster challenge or the more numerous monsters, their combats are taking, 2 hours per fight. And so they're asking this question: what do you do to appropriately challenge a larger party, a party of six in this example, while still allowing for the crits and the other feel goods without it dragging out, without it being a slog? So that is the challenge. That is something that I've run into myself in my own games, whether it was D&D or now that I'm playing Pathfinder. And I'm going to talk about a little strategy I'm working on lately in order to solve this problem known as dynamic hazards. And I think you'll see that Pathfinder has a great subsystem kind of set up already for this. And then I'm going to give you my spin on it with the dynamic system in a second. All right, so let's get into what is the actual problem in the first place. So trying to translate some of the things that the poster's saying here. Combat threats. So in Pathfinder, you have a combat threat, and the most common type of encounter is combat. And the PCs are facing off against monsters, creatures, and the combat encounters are governed by rules. The guidelines that follow, and that's this the section in the player core, I believe this is from, to help build combat encounters that pose appropriate challenges for your group. So we're going to talk about where the poster is getting this information from and why things are a slog. So building the encounters, hazard encounters, works the same way. That, I believe, is going to be the potential solution for this poster, and I'm going to present this in a second. But to build a combat encounter, you decide how the encounter fits the adventure and then estimate the threat. Now, notice in his original post, he was talking about these are very challenging. So, what are the actual threat levels of encounters, combat threats in Pathfinder? Well, you've got trivial, low threat, moderate threat, severe threat, and extreme threats. So I believe he's describing an extreme threat encounter that he's building. So the basic concepts here, trivial, right? It's a piece of cake, low level, moderate, etc. Moderate's your average one that in and of itself is a serious challenge to characters, although they're gonna win, hopefully. But he's setting up extreme encounters, so these are so dangerous that they're likely to be an even match with the characters, particularly if the characters are low in resources. And so you can kind of see immediately, well, if you're setting up extreme encounter threats and you're scaling them up to be, more difficult for 5, 6 players, you could see why they're going to take a while and why they're going to be, 1 or 2 players dying. So I'm not exactly sure if this is a routine for this GM is every night has one of these threats or not, but that could be part of the problem right there. But let's continue to figure out a way in order to make this work, even if you want to use extreme threats, because maybe the players are just good, the character's really strong, whatever's going on, they need to be challenged with extreme threats. All right, now the XP budget. How do you go about building one of these threats, one of these encounters? So here you can see that when you've decided on your threat level, so you got the table down here, trivial, low, moderate, extreme, etc. There's a budget given you, 40, 60, 80, 120, 160. So depending on what threat you're shooting for, you're going to pick one of these. Now it sounded like he was going for extreme. That's the 160. This middle column is for uh, 4-player character teams, right? So this is your budget right here that you can spend. And the monsters, in your monster core book are going to have a certain experience level that you can purchase, so to speak, to add them to your challenge. Um, and it's the costs are relative to the player characters. So a level 20 monster isn't necessarily costing a huge amount of XP. It's relative to the characters. So if the characters are level 20, then that monster 20th level is not going to cost any more than a level 1 monster would to a level 1 character. It's the same value because it's relative. So this is the starting point. You're going to start with this, and then the character adjustment is what we're going to see that he's using to get the extra math. Because different party sizes, what it says in the rulebook is for each additional character in the party beyond the fourth, you increase the budget by the amount shown in the character adjustment. So he is starting with 160 XP budget, and then he's going to be adding 40, 80 more for his extreme encounter. So 240 is his budget for his combats that he's setting up these extreme challenges. Okay, and if you have less than that, you would subtract that number and make it easier that way. Okay, so and then it goes on to say it's best to use the XP increase from more characters to add more enemies or hazards, and the XP decrease from fewer to subtract enemies rather than making one enemy tougher or weaker. So when you go back to his original post, when his first solution was I'm going to make the enemies higher level to challenge, that definitely is going to turn it into a slog because with higher enemies, their levels, they're harder to hit and they're going to save more easily. So that is definitely what he was running into. So the rule book is talking about the main way to spend your extra money is to purchase more foes. But then he was talking about that being a problem. So now you have sort of mass combat situations, and that turned into a slog as well because you're constantly fighting more and more guys. I also can see this being an issue on certain maps because you have only a certain size room that you might be fighting in. And so if you're now adding 2, 3, 4, 6 more enemies to this map, it can get really crowded really fast. And that itself could be a slog because now you're losing maneuverability, that kind of thing. So here's basically how Pathfinder sets up the situation, right? You decide on the difficulty. The difficulty gives you a budget. Then you take the budget and you spend it on foes to stock up. And if you have extra size party, you typically should purchase more foes, although you could buy higher level foes. Okay. Now, the next thing you want to look into is, well, what is a foe and how much do they cost? And this is where the choosing creatures discussion comes in. So in all but the most unusual circumstances, you're going to select creatures for your encounters that are a plus or minus 4 levels to the party. So if his party is level 7, he should be choosing anywhere between a level 3 and a level 11 threat. And this is then what they're talking about here in this creature XP and roll table. So if you are choosing the level of the party, in this case level 7, they're going to cost 40. So if you go back to the budget again, his extreme was 160 plus the character adjustments, a total of 80, puts it at 240. So in other words, he could make a extreme challenge would be 6 times 40 of these creatures, or 6 level 7s should be an extreme challenge and be a knockdown drag out fight. Now, what his math was shown, and this is where I was scratching my head a little bit. If I go back to his original post, he's talking about a 10, a 9, and 2 8s. A 10, a 9, and 2 8s. A 10 is a +3, that's 120. A 9 is 80, so that's 200. And 2 8s is 120. So he's at 320 if my math is right. Right? 60, 60, 120, 200, 320. So he's already above and beyond what the budget was calling for. So yeah, that for sure is not going to be just a slog or a extreme challenge. That's like suicide level challenge. Another one he gave as an example was 11 and 2 7s. So if we go to 11 and 2 7s, and 11's a 160, and the 2 7s is 80. Now that 80, 160, that adds up to 240. So I'm going to assume his first example is maybe just a math error and he didn't actually mean to do 320. But that second example, the 2 7s and the 11 does add up to 240, and that could be an extreme challenge encounter. Now, maybe you're looking at that, especially if you're playing from D&D, that might not seem too bad because you're only talking about 3 foes against 6 player characters. That shouldn't be a slog. That should be like a cakewalk, right? But this thing is 4 levels higher down here. This is going to actually create a problem. I'm going to show you why in a second here. But this is essentially how you would build your encounter, right? You're going to look at the threat level you wish to set up for this encounter. And not every challenge should be like, dire, deadly encounters. You then get a budget from this. You then have your, plus or minus player character adjustment. You then look at the level of the party and the level of the monsters. And like I was saying earlier, everything's a relative value. So whatever your party level is, plus or minus 4 is your standard spread of creatures here. And you've got your budget to purchase things. And you then go look in the monster core, the bestiaries, right? And you find the monsters, whatever level you're looking at, this is how much they're worth. Okay, so that's your basic, scheme here. But he's doing +4 and two zeros here would be what he's setting up. And the +4 itself is a solo level boss. Like this should be the fight essentially. But he's throwing in a couple, I guess, what you would say minions at that point, standard creatures. All right, so let's take a look at what this means in practical terms and why this is a problem for what he's running into, and then we'll get into how a dynamic hazard could solve this issue. So here is the example that we're given where he's got 2 level 7s and a level 11 boss. So here is on the left, creature 7. So this is a 7th level creature. This would be what his 7th level characters would be equivalent to when you look at this party level here. So these guys would be worth 40 XP, these ogre bosses. Now, what do their stats mean in practical encounter terms? The one thing we'll look at is their armor class, 25. And armor class, that's the number you need to roll to hit this thing to do damage. So he was saying one of the problems in the slog is you're only really able to hit or crit if you get a nat 20. Now, critical hits in Pathfinder require rolling 10 above the target number. So if you want to critically hit this ogre boss, this 7th level creature with a 7th level character, you're going to need to roll a 35 in order to hit it. Now, if you're playing D&D, a 35 sounds like impossible. In Pathfinder, it's not, because in Pathfinder, you roll your d20 like you would normally in D&D, but you add a heck of a lot more modifier potential to it. If you are trained in something, that's +2, and you add your level on top of it. So your sword swing, if you're trained with that sword, is +2, and then at 7th level will be +7 more. So you're +9 to hit just by being trained with a sword at level 7. And then you add your to hit or your stat modifier on top of that, your stat boost. Let's say it's strength and you have a +4. So you're already +2 for training, +7 for your level, that's 9. 4 more is +13. You probably have a magic weapon at that point, like a +1 something. So there's +14. And there's probably another +1 from something else you're getting. So let's just say you're +15 to hit, with your best weapon. You might be expert trained in something which give you another +2. But anyway, let's roughly say you're about plus 15. So in order to hit this guy, you need to roll a 10 or higher. All right. So 10 plus your 15 is a 25. If you want to crit it, you're gonna need to roll that nat 20, right? Or let's say it's flat-footed, or you have it, I won't say advantage. That's D&D. You catch it off guard, I think is the new term. That would lower its armor class by 2. So if you get it off guard, you can roll an 18 or better with your +15 to hit will be a critical hit. So that's doable, right? But that's still a pretty tough hit, right? You got to roll a 18 or better to crit it, but a 10 or higher is going to hit. So you're hitting half the time. That's not that hard to hit this guy. And then let's take a look at its saving throws on top of that. If you take a look, it's got Fortitude save bonus of 18, Reflex of 12, and Will saving throw of 15. So if you have a spell or an effect that requires a Fortitude save, he's got a 17 plus whatever he rolls. So if he rolls, let's say, a 10 on a die, he's got a 27 on average is what this guy is rolling against any Fortitude saving throw. And the numbers for your saving your DC, your spell DCs is very similar to hit values. You have 10 plus your modifiers plus your training, all the other stuff. So probably about by level 7 you might have a DC 25 or something like that. So pretty easily he's gonna fort save just by rolling an 8 or higher to save every time. He's probably gonna be critically saving a heck of a lot of times. Because if he rolls, a 15, that's going to be what, 32 or something like that. 18 is going to be 35. So he's going to be critically saving, a decent amount. He's going to be saving a whole bunch against fortitude saves. You'd want to target his reflex because that's he's big and slow, that kind of thing. So this gives you a little bit more likelihood of him failing to save. But even so, he still only needs to roll a 13 or whatever the heck to save. 13 plus 12 is 25. So he's probably going to save there. So this guy's going to be saving, 2 out of 3 every attempts. He's going to probably save based upon just these numbers. So it's going to be pretty hard to hit, critically that is, but you can hit him with an average hit. He's going to be making a lot of saving throws, so he'll be taking, reduced damage, reduced effects. But it's going to be hard to crit or hard for him to be crit failing. That's the level 7 guy. That's the even level guy. Now let's look at the level 11 that the poster was saying he was throwing out there and where his real problem is. A level 11 creature, check this out, it has a 30 armor class immediately. So if you're a plus 15 to hit on normally, you need a roll of 15 just to hit the guy. And the only way you're critting is with a nat 20. I mean, that's it. You can't crit with a 19, right? 19 plus 15, that's 34 you'll hit, but you won't crit them because you need a 40 in order to crit, and you can't roll a 40, even with all the modifiers you got. So only a critical success will allow you to crit damage this guy. And then check out his saving throws: plus 25, plus 18, plus 21. If you've got a piddly 25 DC for your save, he's just looking at you and he saves immediately with a fortitude check. I mean, the only way he's failing at all is with a nat 1 critical fail, and he can't even critically fail anything. Even with his low reflex. This is a cloud giant, by the way, as an example. 18 is the reflex on this one, so 7 or better. 7 plus 18 is a 25. It's going to hit your spell save DC. So this level 11 creature is saving almost automatically on fortitude for sure. Just about automatically on a will save throw. You just need to roll a 4 or higher. 7 or better. So he's going to be saving 9 times out of 10, most likely, and probably critically saving left and right. So this is what the poster is talking about, where it's not getting the feel goods. You're not getting, the players are having a hell of a time even hitting this thing. It's saving against everything, and it's got 220 hit points on top of that. Oh, and it's doing a whole bunch of damage as it's walloping on you with this, plus 25 to hit you. You're gonna get hit. Like, what's your armor class? A 20, a 25, whatever, right? At that level, you're gonna get hit if he just looks at you. Doing 2d6 plus 13, and even with the multiple attack penalty, this guy's gonna whomp you at least twice out of his 3 attacks. So you're gonna be taking easily 4d10 plus 26 damage every freaking turn, right? Just by 2 swings of this thing. And don't even get into his other special abilities, which I've cut off here. So yeah, if this was your encounter, Just these three creatures, this level 11 Cloud Giant is going to be whooping your tail, and you're going to have a hell of a time hitting it. And the two Ogre bosses, these level 7s, they're no pushovers either. So between these three guys, yeah, that's going to be a hell of a fight. And I can see players getting dropped left and right. And that is going to be a slog because the poster has set up an extreme challenge, right? This is a no joke challenge right here. All right, so this is the problem, right? This is the Pathfinder thing. And even if you're trying to set up sort of normal encounters, it still can be a little bit sloggy because you still got to roll pretty high even against level 7s. And then if you were to bump up, I think the other option was have like 7 of these level 7s, I think it was. That would cause a problem. And so what he's saying is that as I add new monsters is the other option. That still could be a slog because I think it was 40 for every extra player, if I remember that number. Where is that number? Yeah, so it's extra 40, extra 40. Even if you wanted the moderate, it'd be plus 20, plus 40. So you could add an extra, if it's just trying to do an average, fight, you throw in another ogre there. So maybe 3 ogres is the fight. I don't know. So yeah, I could definitely see how it could become a slog by having extra players because these numbers are increasing so rapidly that it's gonna be hard to hit them and they're gonna be saving against everything. So the question was, hey, well, how do I fix this problem? How do I solve this problem? And that's where I want to present the solution here. What if there's another option? And it was alluded to in the directions, or sorry, in the mechanics of the rules of the book. And a couple of the repliers to the original Reddit post suggested something along these lines as well. And I'm going to get into this a lot more detail, obviously, with the rest of this video. So here is the solution that the rulebook mentioned, and actually has a whole section about it, which we're going to take a look at here, and that's adding hazards to the combat. In isolated encounters where the PCs have lots of time to recover from hazards effects, simple hazards can feel more like speed bumps than true challenges. But when you combine them with other threats, and here's where I'm going here, even simple hazards can prove perilous. A noisy explosion can draw attention, allowing foes to burst through the door for a dramatic start to the encounter. Simple hazards can also be an active part of an encounter, particularly if the foes know how to avoid triggering them. As their name suggests, complex hazards are a more powerful tool for encounters because they continue to act. They're an ongoing presence in the fight. Ding, ding, ding. When combined with hostile creatures, complex hazards offer the PCs plenty of choices for what they want to do next. And I will also say, offer the GMs plenty of choices. This is particularly true if foes benefit from the hazard. So if you take a look in I think this is from GM Core, they have a hazard table with XP. So you can see here that if you were to add a complex hazard of the party's level, so 7th level party, you were at a 7th level hazard, a trap, it would be worth 40 XP. And that, as an example, was the amount of XP that an extra player is worth in those extreme encounters. So where you can go here is rather than adding more monster creatures to fight with more hit points and you got to roll to hit them, you could add hazards to the fight. They have XP, they do damage, they have a presence, they increase the challenge, but they are not directly, needing to be maneuvered around the board probably. And a lot of times it's sort of a one and done roll or just a consistent you need to save each turn type of situation. So this may be a solution here. Hazards in combat. Okay. And then we go on to take a look at the complex hazards. And complex hazards are functioning similar to monsters. So there's where my thought is starting to go here. And what a couple of the other respondents had put in the Reddit post and what the rulebook was mentioning. Okay, they roll initiative, they have actions of their own, although they're usually automated and routine. Complex hazards can be used in encounters to take the place of a creature of the same level and are worth commensurate XP. That is what I think my poster friend here might want to take a look at. And I'm going to expand upon this with the idea of dynamic hazards, which I'm going to get to in one more minute if you would indulge me. Let's take a look at an example of what a complex hazard is and how it works. Eternal Flame, hazard 7, so that means it's a 7th level hazard. Okay. It has a stealth of plus 18, so in other words, to find it or when it's rolling for its initiative, it's hidden. it rolls with a plus 18. Okay, so that means it's going to be fairly high in the initiative order. Raging spectral inferno arises out of thin air, strengthening all undead creatures within its area. This haunt most often arises from the charred remains of a group of three people who burn to death, whether in a terrible accident or a deliberate execution, and their unavenged souls burn with rage. Okay, I'm not going to get into all the particulars of it, but what does it do? How does it work? Living creature gets within 10 feet. It's going to trigger the Syrian agony. They've got to make a DC 25 will save. If not, they become sickened. They're sickened one, two, or three, and then there's it. I cut it off, but it goes. You take damage. This thing can move around the battlefield. So you've got a potential threat here that is ongoing. It can be disabled. DC 27 diplomacy check, DC 30 religion check can shut it off and remove it, right? And the good news here is it's sort of a one and done thing. So unlike a monster, you got to hit and hit and hit. You can have one character kind of peel off to deal with this thing, try to figure it out, so that it can be shut off. So it can be a challenge, a temporary challenge, or you can let it keep, ticking away. It's up to you. But you could ignore it and let it do its thing, or you can attack it, shut it off, whatever you want. But it's going to cause problems. It's going to do damage. It's going to increase the challenge of that encounter, especially if the enemy knows about it. And that kind of leads into my concept here of these dynamic hazards, because they're not just any hazard, they are purposeful dynamic hazards. So I'm going to give you my definition. These are not just your mundane gotcha type of obstacle that exists outside the story, right? This is a hazard that has a purpose. It has a story behind it. It's integrated into your narrative. It's woven into your environment as a natural occurrence or consequence of some encounter that's happening. It can be triggered by encounter actions of the PCs, of NPCs, or creatures around the room. It's part of a tactical decision-making process, and you can flavor these things with their own personalities, which I think is probably the best use. Like, they have a purpose. It's not just a arrow trap that shoots things out of the wall. Like, okay, great. No, it has like its own life, its own, vibe to it, its own personality. It's part of this ecosystem where this encounter is occurring, and the bad guys know it's there, and they're going to use it against you. Okay. So 6 strategies for using these dynamic hazards to reduce this combat slog. This is what I really want to get into the meat of the rest of this video here. So boom, the goals for these dynamic hazards are as follows. I want you to think creatively about how to use the environment, your character's actions, antagonist strategies, all of these things, because they can lead to engaging story-driven hazards. That's what you're shooting for here. Dynamic, engaging hazards. You want to design your hazards so that they feel integral to this unfolding encounter that's happening, this fight. They enhance the player's immersion as they're occurring. They add impact to tactical decisions and choices and interactions that are happening during this encounter. And the third goal when you're coming up with these dynamic hazards is you want to build your encounters so that you have fewer dice rolls overall, less hit points that you need to worry about. This is what's causing the slog, right? It's you're rolling to hit and rolling to save and rolling missing, and you're trying to whittle down those hit points. Roll, 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 miss, 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 save, save, save. And nothing seems to be, happening. Nothing seems to be benefiting from this whole thing. That's where the slog comes in. So if you're replacing that with these hazards, that they could be static, they could be mobile, but they're dynamic to the encounter, it's gonna make the combat challenging and feel like it's a bigger fight than it really is. All right, strategy 1, direct consequences. So here we go. Hazards are triggered by specific actions that are taken by your characters within the story, making their appearance a direct result of the narrative unfolding. What am I talking about? I'll give you full rundown here, deep dive on this one. Strategy is this scenario. You've got an arcane study library. You got a wizard who's protected by a magical construct. He's working to summon some extraplanar creature, right? There's this gravity altering trap. It's replacing that second lieutenant that your XP budget said should be there to account for those extra players. But instead of you putting another construct that has XP or AC and hit points, everything else, you put this anti-gravity trap or gravity altering trap in there. Tactic. The gravity trap is designed to disrupt the player's initial strategy, separate them, making it easy for the wizard in this construct to engage them. This encourages your players to think tactically about where they are and the order in which they're engaging the foes. Sequential challenges. The trap can serve as an initial challenge that needs to be overcome. You can do it that way, allowing your players to then focus on the combatants, or you can trigger it during the fight as a result of some action of the player, maybe even the NPC, whatever, that adds a layer of complexity to the ongoing fight. Now it would seem to be a one-on-one fight or two-on-one fight or whatever. Now it's a boom, this thing happens, and all hell breaks loose. Complementary threats. The wizard and construct each have their own roles in this fight. The wizard's trying to focus on area of control, let's say spells, long range attacks. The construct is getting into melee, just mashing players to pieces. They're maybe trying to get the players to go into the traps area again and trigger it again, right? They're using this thing. Dynamic environment, the study, this library itself could be riddled with other minor magical quirks that are acting as obstacles and aids. Floating books providing cover, maybe enchanted instruments that give buffs or debuffs. They're influencing the flow of the battle. The wizard knows what these things are, the construct knows what they are, and they're using them to their advantage. Narrative tie-ins. The presence of the wizard and this construct, you weave these into your narrative of this trap. This trap was designed to complement the fighting style of the construct. Maybe the construct can fly, so when this gravity flipping trap happens and people are falling up and others are falling down, this thing's just flying around, no big deal, and it's beating the hell out of people. And it's triggered at the critical moment when the wizard needs it the most, because he's got some magical door or whatever they break through, and now the wizard like, wow, you fools, you've triggered my trap card type of thing. Running through this encounter, initiative, right? Your players, they enter the study. The magical construct engages them in the fight. It seems slow and lumbering, unable to keep the party away from the sealed door on the other side. And, well, on the other side of that door, that's where the wizard is. That's where the summoning is happening, right? We got to get to the door, got to get to the door. You fall right into the trap. The player forces the door open, triggers the gravity trap. It scatters the party, some up, some down. Some are being crushed, some are floating, whatever's going on. Their tactics that they thought were perfect, totally trashed at this point. The wizard now is taking advantage of this chaos, casting spells against the scattered people. Maybe they got people up on the ceiling, he shoots lightning bolts up there or something like that. The slow, lumbering construct suddenly sprouting wings and is flying, and the players can't get away from it, run anymore because they're just floating themselves. They don't have wings. This thing comes right over and starts pummeling them into soup. Strategy. The players have to quickly recover from this trap's effects and reposition. This could involve them using other environmental features to get advantages, like they're trying to get cover behind the bookcases and stuff like that. They're trying to deactivate this trap to even the playing field again. In the final confrontation, the trap is mitigated, it's shut off, whatever happens. The players now can coordinate their attacks and focus again on the construct and the wizard, using what they've learned from this quick encounter in order to turn the tide. So it's the same kind of XP budget you were working with for, let's say, a dangerous encounter, but instead of that extra monster, that extra XP being extra, lieutenant or other creatures, you made it a trap. It made it challenging, but as GM, you didn't need to sit there and run this thing and move it around the room and everything else. It just was on and has an initiative and it's triggering something happening, and the players need to save against it, otherwise they take damage. Easy peasy, done. The players can ignore it if they want, or they can try to shut it off if they want. It's up to them. If they have ways to fly and get around, they don't need to worry about it. If they don't, they should go shut it off. Cool. Second type of dynamic encounter I was thinking about, environmental storytelling. The environment itself has a story with its hazards emerging as natural extensions of the narrative. They're not just placed around willy-nilly, they exist for a reason, and it's tied into the location, its history, the inhabitants, and what they're doing. I kind of like this one sort of as like layer actions in D&D terminology. I think this is a good example of that. Strategy. Here's another example for this scenario. Players are navigating a city during some rebellion. They're trying to get to the palace where this warlord is seizing power, but the streets are chaotic, they're tense, they're filled with these makeshift barricades, and there's defenses, and there's rebels, pockets of rebels around. This is a dynamic hazard you're setting up here. There are makeshift explosives that are at one of these barricades. So rather than, another pocket of enemies, we got to roll dice, and we got to hit stuff, and we got to go through this one and through the next encampment or the next, and the next one, you have a bomb or some other sort of explosives. Now they're making a save or they're getting blown up, right? Tactics, the barricade strategically placed at a choke point. Players got to get past there. It's controlling movement. It's affecting the tactics of the players, the NPCs, because when it blows up, rebels come running. If you are careless about it as a PC, it's going to blow up. You have to make a reflex save. Avoid damage. They might have to use their skills, slow down and pick a lock or disarm whatever it is. This causes a challenge, but you can immediately resolve it without a whole bunch of die rolling and damage and, tactics and that kind of stuff. Minis moving around the board. And then the rebels are using these barricades as part of their strategy, right? They're attacking when the bomb goes off or when the players slow down to disable something. They come in, they can take advantage of this sort of thing. So you can create sort of these multiple little minor things and turn it into one bigger encounter that boom, bomb goes off, three dudes jump out, shoot arrows, maybe they retreat back to the next defensive line, that kind of stuff. And it makes this whole story, this unfolding encounter as you're going down the street. Narrative depth, the barricade, the explosive, these aren't just obstacles, they're manifestation of the entire this rebel plight that's happening here. Their desperation, their resourcefulness, whatever. The players are interacting with these hazards. They're trying to uncover what's happening in the city. Maybe they're hearing, more information about what's going on at the palace as they're going through here. Whatever. There's all kinds of little things, little stop points you can have as they're reaching each of these barricades that gives them information. Maybe they encounter some of these, rebel NPCs themselves. And then the actual encounter example here, as the PCs are approaching these barricades, they see recent activity. There's this hastily erected barricade. There's this rebel post that seems to be abandoned. Man, there's something going on here. What is it? Hint, clues. If they trigger it though, they try to move the barricade out of the way. They fumble whatever to try to move this explosive. Boom, it goes off. Damage, disruption. Maybe it scatters the party, and half of them need to go one way, half of them need to go the other way because something got obstruction got fell down in front of them. The rebels see these explosions. These are a signal to trigger for them to attack or for them to organize a different response. They new formation they erect in the new barricade they're putting up, whatever, right? They're going to change their strategies. And after this initial chaos, the players can decide, do we need to approach each barricade more cautiously? Do we have some sort of tools or magic that we can overcome this stuff? Should we send our rogue out to scout it first? Should we go around in a different path? Right? It changes the whole, dynamic at that point. Maybe they can use the bombs against the rebels and lure them out somehow. And then integration. Throughout this encounter, the players are getting information about what's going on in the city, about what's going on with this warlord in the palace. Perhaps there's a diplomatic solution to this whole thing if they get enough info from these NPCs that are out there instead of having to turn it into the big bad evil guy fight at the end of this slog down the street, right? Third dynamic hazard strategy, story events. Have your hazards, introduce them as events that are unfolding within the story or as a result of or in conjunction with a plot development. And I like this idea because the PCs can't short circuit this one in advance because it doesn't trigger until the story is triggered. And when you see the example, you see what I'm talking about. But rather than sort of a hazard being out there, the PCs could, like if you go back to the last one, the PCs could just detect all these explosives and bypass, thereby making sort of that encounter XP budget kind of meaningless because they're just skipping everything anyway. You could have something like this where it's like a hidden threat, but it's hidden in the sense that it has to be triggered by the story being triggered. So example here or scenario, the players are in a negotiation with a dragon for some treasure that's in its lair, and there's piles of coins everywhere, right? And all this magical stuff and whatever else. And the hazard here is a landslide that's going to get triggered by the dragon's tail, and it replaces this combat scenario with guards and whatever else that minions that would be guarding this lair itself. or the dragon summoning, minions, kobolds or something come running. So the landslide creates this immediate environmental threat, this challenge that requires a quick decision. That's another thing about quick decisions. You got to make these. That's the other thing about a slog is it's slow, and everybody's trying to look at their spells and figure out stuff. Boom! No, this happens. You got to make a move right now. Give me a reflex save. So the hazard manipulates terrain. The players have to move. They got to think. They got to act swiftly. This negotiation, this back and forth chit chat, nothing super exciting, turns into this dynamic, engaging scenario now. And there's a quick resolution as the treasure, cascades down. Maybe there's these other traps that are in and amongst the treasure. They're getting triggered, bursts of energy, ensnaring magical traps, whatever. The players got to make saves. They got to use skills. They need to get through this shifting treasure, and the hazard resolves itself. It's done as soon as all the collapse is done. And then the complementary threat is while the landslide is occurring, the dragon might use the chaos to test the players in other ways to resolve, their resolve to even do this, their abilities they might have. It might manipulate the environment a little bit more. Maybe it's triggering some of these other magical attacks or little magical, you know, coin minions or something. I don't know. It could do whatever, trying to just see what the players are made out of. Are they worthy of this item they're asking for? And then the treasure and its inherent traps, they're not just a physical challenge, but they have the history of this dragon and the treasure because maybe the thing they're looking for is, obviously important and they need to know about it, or other things are falling that might have importance. And each piece that they might see or encounter in this horde that's falling on them can tell a story. It might have a curse. It could link this immediate hazard to the broader lore of your world and the dragon's personal, story as well. And then the actual encounter, the way this could work out is, the party's engaging with this dragon. They're discussing the terms. They're negotiating. Really thick tension in the air, and the environment is, this visually rich, glimmering, sparkling, walls of stacks of coins and stuff and artifacts all around. And then mid discussion, the dragon's tail knocks over a stack. Maybe it was on accident. Oops. Maybe because the it was a tense, heated discussion, and the dragon got angry, so it kind of shuffled its wings, like, "How dare you, make demands of me?" Crash, and stuff falls down. Maybe it's just a test to see how alert are these party people. Boom, stuff comes down, landslide of treasure. Not meant to really kill them, but just challenge them and see if they're worthy. The gold, the gems are tumbling down. Ancient traps maybe triggering off. The party's got to dodge. They got to bob. They got to weave. They got to get out of these snares. Make these quick decisions. Reflexes, right? Strategy. The players have to decide whether they should seek cover. They should help each other. They should maybe use, the chaos to their own advantage and steal something while stuff is falling. And the dragon, meanwhile, is kind of doing this on purpose, just sort of watching and seeing how they act. Are they going to be helpful to one another, or is it every man for himself? That sort of thing. And then continue talk. So once this chaos subsides, how did the party handle the situation? Did it earn the dragon's respect or its disdain? And then if it did respect what happened, maybe it's, "Oh, you've proven yourself to me, and I shall grant your wish," or you've worthy, you're now ready for the true test type of thing, or "I need to eat you because you people are a bunch of pie holes. Get out." Fourth dynamic hazard. This could be part of a trap as part of the antagonist strategy. They're designed to protect, to conceal, to deter rather than just harm, and they make sense within the context of the antagonist goals and their resources, right? It's part of what this big bad evil guy is about. They know the trap is there. They're the one who put it there. That's one of the problem I have with some traps, at least in like published stuff. It just seems like willy-nilly somebody put a trap somewhere, like a pressure plate. Like, okay, why? Like, why is it here? Who set this? What were they attempting to accomplish? Okay, strategy, how to use this hazard. In a scenario like this, you got the characters, the PCs, they're infiltrating some high-tech facility. Maybe you got some sci-fi, game you're playing here, controlled by some rogue AI, or maybe it's some ancient derelict alien ship in your fantasy world that the players are exploring. And this AI is designed to defend this facility using the most efficient means it can. And so it's studying the players. And so it can reroute power to different parts of the facility, like electrify the floors. activate security drones. You can only maybe do one of these things at a time. It's got limited resources. So instead of the player characters encountering, guard after guard after guard as they're going through this facility, the hazards are replacing some of these things, and they're dynamic, and they can be moved around to different scenarios, and they can also be shut off because they're controlled by a power source, let's say. So tactics, the AI's control over the facility defenses allows it to dynamically alter the battlefield. This capability can be used to create hazards that are triggered by the player's location, what they're doing, and even if they fail a certain, puzzle that they're trying to solve quickly, this hazard can be triggered on them as well. Immediate threats. So when the players enter a specific area, specific zone, that AI is triggering that electrified, floor, or the security drones come buzzing in for a brief, like pew pew pew, shoot and scoot. Quick reflexes again, maybe a quick intelligence check to see if they can shut it down. Like the whole trash compactor, C3PO. I need R2 to shut down the trash compactor type of thing, right? It's an immediate pop, 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 done, not this big, long fight. Complementary threats, the AI can use these hazards not only as direct attacks to soften up the enemy, but maybe it's trying to herd the players in a specific location for a big fight. It's trying to set them up for a strategic encounter where it has the advantage, trying to isolate them from one another, etc. It's trying to, enhance its own tactical position. Narrative depth, each hazard is revealing to the characters, however, its programming, its resources. So they can learn what this thing can and can't do. So they might realize, oh, these electrified floors are only in the red zone, rooms, high security. They might realize that the AI is only protecting its most valuable areas and not other places that allow them to navigate around the facility more easily. The drones could have different lethality levels that the players realize, knowing that the AI is prioritizing what it's doing. It's only sending, some of those fluff drones at us. Where are the big heavy hitters we heard about? Basic encounter idea here. An example, you enter this derelict ship, let's say, this facility. They trigger the security alert. The AI is assessing the players as they enter. It's got little spy cameras or whatever. It's rerouting power. This is all the little hints and clues about its capability, its ability to control the environment. The players trigger that, whatever the trap is. They've gone into a certain room they shouldn't go. Boom, the floors go electric. Got to make a quick jump to non-conductive surfaces, or a quick shut down the power source, figure out the code on the panel on the door. Adaptive response by this AI. So based upon what the party's successes or failure, the AI is recalculating. It's deploying security drones. The drones, they give these brief little combat encounters, testing the player's abilities, testing their skills. It's trying to learn about them. They're not trying to there to necessarily kill them right away. They're pow pow pow, or maybe taking DNA samples or whatever, and then they're leaving. Or if it does get to a slog fight, you have these things just self-destruct, boom, and they're done. Move on. The strategy that the AI is attempting to deploy here is it's seeing the threats to manipulate. It's using its threats to manipulate the players to where they're going. So it's funneling them in a direction. This is allowing you to control the flow of the combat overall. If you see the whole facility as the battlefield, and the final area is the boss room where the trap is, the real trap, the critical location where the final boss is going to be. And that AI at that point is engaging directly with the party. And you've used all these little, nitty gritty encounters as part of that XP budget for this overall encounter. And now the final battle's here with just the AI itself or whatever. All right, then fifth dynamic hazard, interconnected solutions is another idea I was having. The hazards and their solutions, or the countermeasures, they're interconnected with the narrative, with the story. They require the players to engage with the story or the environment to overcome these things. What am I talking about here? Again, let's take a look at this, how you would deploy this, what strategy. Here's a scenario. The players are exploring some ancient temple dedicated to some forgotten deity. The temple's filled with these intricate mechanisms and traps, and they're all thematically linked to the deity's lore, replacing that standard enemy patrols or guardians, that kind of thing. There's just a bunch of these little traps and things along the way. And each trap or hazard requires understanding and interacting with the temple, its lore, to be safely navigated or deactivated. And this could require deciphering hieroglyphic writing, doing specific rituals in a correct order, using parts of the temple's construction itself to bypass the obstacles, right? Quick resolution again here. We've got a particular room will fill up, let's say, with poisonous gas when the players incorrectly, manipulate or open up the sacred altar or whatever. They weren't paying attention to the clues. They didn't decipher something earlier. The only way to stop the gas is to access this altar is to solve some riddle about the deity myth. And it's carved in the walls of the temple, and the solution has to be acted on quickly, turning this potentially, this big long fight with a bunch of guards or whatever else, or mummies. And it's just no, it's just a poison gas trap. You solve it, otherwise you take a buttload of poison damage. Done, right? Complementary threats. While you're solving this riddle under the pressure of the gas, other temple defenses can start activating. Maybe you want to up the challenge of this encounter, right? Animated statues. They only halt once the riddle's solved. They keep coming and they're attacking. Or maybe there's a light-based puzzle that, the classic reflecting beams type of thing that, stops additional traps from being triggered if you angle the beams of light correctly. Narrative depth on these riddle solutions, they're not random. They're tied into your lore of this deity and the temple itself. The solution is teaching the players more about the deity's history, the beliefs, the followers, the enriching the story of the game. It gives context for the temple's design and the challenges. So it's not just a bunch of arrow traps shooting out the wall. And then the example how this encounter would actually work: exploration. So your party starts exploring this temple. They encounter these symbols, these inscriptions that are hinting about the nature of the deity, the significance of some ritual. Trigger. They attempt to access this altar, releases this poisonous gas. The clues that they've encountered thus far suggest that they are supposed to be using purity and wisdom for some ritual approach. They have to read the riddle that's inscribed around the room, which refers to the creation myth of the deity. And they solve this riddle. It involves putting items in a correct sequence or performing actions in a sequence that mirrors the myth. Maybe it's those mirrors need to be manipulated and a light needs to shine on a certain thing. Then the PCs are attempting to solve this riddle. Other hazards are activating, the pressure's mounting. Things are getting more serious, right? This doesn't need to be a combat, right? You've got all these little traps starting to fire off as this thing is going down, and the floors begin to shift. The walls start to close down. You can make it total like hell, and they got to solve this thing. They better hurry up, right? Lots of potential XP and hazard and damage and death here, but not a bunch of die rolling and moving, minis around and attack rolls and saving throws and all that stuff. Revelation: upon correctly solving this riddle, the gas dissipates, the temple's defenses stand down, the altar opens up, you see the sacred relics, the knowledge that the players were questing for. They have a deep understanding of this deity, which could help them in future encounters related to the culture of the Pantheon. Boom, that session's over, right? You didn't have to have a big old fight. And then the sixth strategy of a dynamic hazard is moral and ethical implications. And I just love these types of, hazards or encounters in the games that I run. Whenever you put the players, inner thoughts and workings on the line. So some hazards you can design with moral and ethical implications. Challenge your players to make decisions that align with their characters' values and the story themes in order to reduce the threat of some difficult encounters. So they can do something that might be morally ambiguous, but it will help them reduce the threat of an encounter. So you almost lay it out to them and say, hey man, there's a slog encounter coming up. You could make it easier if you don't mind sacrificing something. All right, strategy. Scenario here. How would you do this? Players navigate an old castle, let's say, that's turned into some makeshift prison. And there's prisoners of war. They're being held in cages by these enemy monsters or whatever. And the hazard's this: that there's a mechanism that you can trigger that could release these soldiers or keep them confined if you wish, with implications for both the players and the broader narrative. And what are we talking about here? So the mechanism is designed to be triggered. You can make it an accident, like, oh crap, I just opened it. What do we do? Do we go and dive into the fight, or do we just let it happen? You'll see what I'm talking about in a minute. Uh, and then decision to release or not release these captives affects not only the moral alignment of the party, but also the tactical landscape as well. Because the freed prisoners, if they get out, will draw the attention of these monstrous guards, which makes these prisoners cannon fodder, helpless prey. So, do the player characters let it happen, using it as a distraction, or do they get involved and try to stop it, thereby making the encounter harder? Immediate threat. The hazard presents an immediate dilemma to the party upon discovery. The decision to trigger the release mechanism on purpose can be made quickly, uh, but the consequences of the decision unfold rapidly, ensuring that's an encounter. So they trigger this thing. The prisoners are out. The monsters start attacking them. So you make a decision quick. The results happen immediately. Encounter's done. Players can like run away or get past, let's say, these guards. Complementary threats. Depending on the choice made, different threats or benefits arise. So if the prisoners are released, some might survive and flee, but the players are going to know that most are going to die in a bloodbath. But if they're kept in prison, the players might face this ethical repercussion that, well, geez, these prisoners, we could have saved or could have freed them, but now they see them being marched off to some slave boat or ship or whatever and taken to some other location, out of the scene, and they know they're going to be sold into slavery, and that's probably the end of most of them. Although they might live a while before they die as slaves, right? So they can reduce this threat of the guards immediately because the fighting with the prisoners that might kill a couple guards might distract the guards so that the PCs can get by, or they let the poor guys get sold into slavery. Maybe some of the guards go to take them, but maybe most of the guards are there later and now they have to fight them later. So it's kind of like that dilemma. Do I sacrifice a bunch of these guys or not? And this moral decision is it's integrated into your story's theme, right? Maybe you got a big theme going in your campaign about freedom, right? Security, war, the consequences of imprisonment, enslavement, that kind of thing. And this scenario just throws it out there. You guys going to be, which side are you going to choose? You're going to choose kind of the selfish side and let these prisoners die fighting these guards so that you can get by without having to fight the guards, or you're going to let them survive, be sold into slavery, and then you have to fight more of the guards later because you didn't take advantage of this scenario here. So it gives them that question. They encounter something like this. The party's navigating this prison camp, right? They see this control lever. They know it's this sea of cages. They can open them all up, and all these prisoners come running out, but the monsters will attack them, and maybe some of the prisoners are seeing them, and they're like, "Please, please, let us out." And they have to decide: release the prisoners, draw the attention of the guards, or leave them in there, and these guys are going to go get taken away as slaves at some point. If they free them, the prisoners are going to scatter, creating chaos. The guards are reacting violently, beat down, slaying all these escaping prisoners. And the decision is going to impact the party's reputation, right? Because they let these guys, maybe die or let them get sold into slavery and maybe didn't do anything. And so people or allies might find out this, or survivors might become their enemies. I saw what you did. Or maybe with the players' help, they can gain allies with this. There's all kinds of things that can come out of this, right? With future interactions later. And then at the end of this, there's that reflective moment where the party gets to think about what happened, the ramifications of the choices they made or didn't make. And you have this big moral, tactical, discussion at this point. Like, what does this mean? All right, so hey, let's wrap this up. Dynamic hazards against the slog beast. What's the deal? These dynamic hazards, they introduce strategic challenges that require quick decision making. That's one of the big things here. And they shift the focus from prolonged physical conflicts to these engaging, tactical, narrative driven, little encounters. rather than die roll, die roll, die roll. During an encounter, you're integrating these things seamlessly into your storyline. In the environment, enhancing the immersion, you're getting your players to utilize the surroundings and narrative cues to overcome them. You don't have to have so many die rolls because these traps, these hazards, are going to cause more of a focus on strategy and interacting with the environment than rolling a nat 20 in order to hit something or hoping the guy rolls a nat 1 in order to not to fail a save against your last spell, that sort of thing. And it shifts that mentality from this challenging encounter has to be against this number of foes, and I got to run this attack sequences, and we got to try to get, off guard, and we got to get our reactive strikes lined up, and all this stuff into, a more dynamic scenario where maybe that's part of the fight, but then there are these hazards going on over here as well. And then lastly, the use of these hazards to help against the sloggers, gets you as a GM to think creatively about your encounter and designing it. You can start incorporating elements that are going to challenge your players' combat abilities, yes, but also get their problem solving skills checked, their ethical judgments, their interactions with your game world. All those things can be part of your encounters. All right, so hopefully there were some good information in here about encounter design and coming up with hazards and dynamic hazards specifically, methods to reduce what the original OP was talking about, a slog. So even though you may have more player characters, you don't need to just challenge them by having more enemies or harder to hit enemies. You can use hazards and you can use dynamic hazards in your game in order to help it avoid the slog. Have yourselves a good night and peace out.